Okay, first off, major spoiler warning for the events of Silent Hill F in this video, plus mentions of the other Silent Hill games as well. Also another warning for certain topics which may be a little uncomfortable for certain viewers, and also a trypophobia warning, so again, you have been warned. So recently I had the pleasure of playing the newest Silent Hill game introduced into the main franchise, none other than Silent Hill F. We've been teased about this game for such a long time, and it finally came out this year for us to play, and I really enjoyed it. It was a very interesting experience, very different and unique to the other Silent Hill games, which we'll get to later, but a very interesting experience. And I think what hooked me the most would be the story in this game. It is a story very unique to the Silent Hill franchise, so it was a very interesting story. And because of that reason, today I have decided that I am going to make a Silent Hill F analysis video. Just my personal thoughts, just explaining what I want to talk about in terms of this game, because I feel like there's a lot of themes in this game that really speak out to me, and I want to share my thoughts with you guys. Of course, if you've seen some of my other content on this channel, this is something I've never done before, but it is also something I've wanted to try and do because I like video games. I just love them. And sometimes there are certain video games that really stick with me and make me want to talk about them a lot. So here I am. Today I'm going to be nerding about Silent Hill F. So how this video is going to work out, we're going to start off with a story recap. So I'm just going to go over the story because there is a lot to know about the story, and I feel like I need to give that context before I really discuss the game in more detail. So we'll be doing a story recap. I will then also be talking about the characters, because there are certain characters in this game that I really want to speak about because they're very interestingly written in the game. So we're going to do that. Then I'm going to talk about the themes, the bit where I will nerd out the most likely. There are a lot of themes in this game that I really want to delve into, talk about, have some feelings about that I want to share with you guys. And then I'm also going to be talking about the links between Silent Hill F and some of the other mainline games in the franchise. Yes, Silent Hill F has been announced to be its own separate thing from the other games, but that doesn't mean we can speculate and see some assumptions, because there are definitely some things in F that have caught a lot of people's attention recently, so we'll be discussing those too. And then at the end, I'm going to be giving my final thoughts and feelings about how this game is. So I hope you enjoy this video. Again, it's something new I've done, so I hope you guys like it. And if you did, definitely make sure to like and subscribe. And definitely share your thoughts too, because I really want to hear what you guys think about this game as well. Whether you've played the game before or just hearing it for the first time from this video, I definitely want to see what your guys' thoughts are in the comments below. Another thing too, just want to let you guys know, I played Silent Hill F during my Twitch streams. At the time of recording, we are actually doing a Silent Hill marathon, so we're going through some of the other Silent Hill games after Silent Hill F for Halloween month, so I hope you guys can follow me there too. We're trying to reach 100 followers, so it'd mean the world to me if you could follow me there on Twitch too. I mostly stream every day as well, so there's always stuff happening with my content, so definitely make sure to follow there too. Oh, and another thing too, I am going to be putting timestamps in this video, so if you are someone who's already played the game and just wants to go and hear my yapping about the characters and the analysis and the themes and so on, you can obviously skip forward in the video. But without further ado, let's start off with the story recap of Silent Hill F. The events of Silent Hill F take place in the fictional town of Ebisugaoka in 60s Japan. We play the role of Shimizu Hinako, a teenager in her 20s. The game starts off with a vision of when she was a child and playing with her childhood doll. She talks about how the girls that she would play with don't allow her to play with them anymore because she hangs out with boys more often. The young Hinako is also seen to be speaking with her sister, Junko, And then we cut off to a moment in time where they're all grown up and they're talking and reminiscing with each other. Afterwards, we are then set to present day, where Hinako is seen arguing with her parents. And we'll talk more about the parents in a bit more detail later, but from that first cutscene alone, you can already tell that there's a rough relationship, especially between the dad and Hinako herself. Hinako storms out of the parents' home and decides that she will go visit her friends in the town. As we make our way into town, we meet our first friend of the friend group, and her name is Igarashi Sakuko. We tell Sakuko that we're going to be meeting all of the friends at the Chizuruya store in town, and so Sakuko gets ready to meet them. However, she calls Hinako a traitor, and we will get into why she calls Hinako a traitor later on. Once we arrive at Chizuruya, we then meet the rest of the friend group, Shu Iwai and Rinko Nishida. We first see Shu sitting by the store, and I want you guys to take close attention to one specific bit when we meet him, where Shu gives us some tablets. And we'll talk about that scene in a bit more detail later because it is very important for what happens in the rest of the game. But we meet Shu first, and it's a very awkward exchange, which, to be fair, Silent Hill is very known for its awkward exchanges, so it's nothing new really. But we then see the rest of the gang, and everyone meets up at the store. Everyone has their playful moments, talking about each other and talking about each other's day. However, as that is going on, in the distance, Hinako notices that a certain foggy presence is emerging in town. And then, out of nowhere, this happens. Some sort of evil power begins to take over Ebisugaoka, and Sakuko is the first to fall. Everyone is then seen running away from this foggy, evil presence. Notice also the spider lilies in the background. Of course, you can't have a Japanese horror game without spider lilies. But we are seen running away from the fog monster, which will reveal its identity later. But Hinako splits up with the group as she is running away, and as you make her way through the streets running away from the evil presence, we then hear Junko's voice slightly, and a ladder falls to help us escape from this presence. We are severely injured from that running away, and so we decide to take some pills. Again, these were the same pills that were given to us by Shu in that cutscene. And those pills count as our healing items. Hinako is split up from her friends, so we have to find a way to meet up with everyone and see how things are going. We meet our first new monster introduced into this game. We don't have a weapon, of course, to fight it, but we can evade it at the end of the day. But in good old Silent Hill fashion, we pick up the next best thing, the greatest weapon of all time. A metal pipe. We make it back to Chizuruya's store, and we see Sakuko's dead corpse on the street, flowers blooming from the body. Hinako bids farewell to Sakuko by resting her at the Chizuruya store. And then, we take our revenge by fighting the enemies in a good old gang-styled fight. After which, we then pass out, and the world begins to shift. We then find ourselves in this dark, shrine-like room with an altar at the front, which kind of acts as our first puzzle of the game. Oh, and also when we wake up, we hear someone's voice in the distance. Upon completing the puzzle, we are then led out of the room, and we meet Foxman. Oh, look at him. Isn't he cool looking? Isn't he so hot? I mean, what? I know he's called Fox Mask, but I called him Foxman, so we're just going to go ahead and call him Foxman. But yes, we meet Foxman, and Foxman tells Hinako to follow him. So, what do? We follow him, of course, duh. As we go through this dark shrine world, we start to see our environment a little bit more. Obviously, it's dark, but you see a lot of shrines around the area. A lot of fox shrines, to be specific, around the area. Fox statues as well. And also, the sky is red? Yeah. Fox Mask says that he has prepared for us a special key that is used to open the big shrine door in the area. So, we locate the key and enter the big shrine door, while also being chased by another new monster type. Now, another thing to point out in this area, we actually see our childhood doll. Yes, the childhood doll from the start of the game. We see it in this area. I wonder why, though. But anyway, we see it, and at one point it also warns us about Foxman. So the sus alarms for Foxman go off immediately. As we open the door, we are then knocked out by some weird thing that rushes towards us, and as that happens, we then transition back into the real fog town of Ebisugaoka. As we return back to the town, we see Shu by Hinako, urging her to wake up. We wake up, we get back to town, try to get our bearings set. We ask where Rinko is gone, and Shu suggests that maybe we should go to Rinko's house, because why not? I mean, that's the next best place to go to. So, we make our way through town, trying to find Rinko. As we make our way through town, trying to get to Rinko's house, we see a lot more of the monsters invading the town. We then get attacked by this thing, which we'll talk a lot more about later on, because it relates to a certain character in this game. And then we meet up with Shu again, and arrive at the rice fields, reminiscing about the past and how they used to play Space Wars together. Shu and Hinako are very close pals and very good childhood friends. Shu saw Hinako as his partner and not just some girl growing up in Ebisugaoka. And they used to play a childhood game called Space Wars together. As we reminisce the past and try to find a way to Rinko's house, Shu disappears and we are transported into this lost area in the rice fields, the fog thick as ever. As we go through this area, we see a lot of scarecrows posted around, and they look suspiciously similar to us and our friends. I mean, they have the school outfits, and even one of them looks very similar to Shu, in fact. As we go through this scarecrow puzzle, we see certain notes talking about Hinako, maybe directed towards her, and some of which may seem very jealous or confronting in a way. After we complete the puzzle, we then return back to reality, and we see Shu outside Rinko's house. Shu calls out for Rinko, and Rinko comes out in open arms for Shu, and a bit less enthusiastically when Rinko sees Hinako. The reason that's the case, and we'll talk a lot more about that when we talk about Rinko in a bit more detail, but essentially, Rinko had a crush on Shu, and she even told Hinako about this. However, when Rinko would see that Shu and Hinako hang around a lot more together, Rinko would have a bit of jealousy towards that. And again, we will talk a lot more in detail about Rinko's character when we get to the character analysis. But yes, we meet up and we discuss ways of how to leave the town. Rinko says that we can't since the bridge has been collapsed, the only walking pathway to leave the town. Shu suggests that we take the mountain path, and so everyone prepares to leave. Rinko goes to the kitchen to get some medication, and Hinako comes along to give a helping hand, as any friend would do. As we go down the stairs, we see Rinko giving us the demon look, and we then also see the childhood doll again, this time warning us to beware of Rinko. As we see that message, we fall down the stairs. Or should I say, that jealous bitch pushed us down the stairs. With that, we transition back into the Dark Shrine world. Just to let you know, there's going to be a lot of transitioning from the Fog world to the Dark Shrine world, so just be aware of that. The Hinako in the Shrine world has to try and find a way to mate up with the Foxman, and so we do that. While we're in the area though, we somehow hear Sakuko's voice. Now, you may be wondering, how is that the case? We saw Sakuko die. But either way, we still see Sakuko, and in a naive way, we still believe we can find her somewhere, so we look and investigate the noise, as well as trying to find the other key used to open the next big shrine door. Once we find the key item, that same red ominous power looms over the area once more, and we find ourselves chasing ourselves towards the door to escape. While that is happening, we still continually hear Sakuko's voice in the background, almost as if haunting her. Maybe Hinako's guilt for not being able to save Sakuko when she died back in the town. After we escape, we find Sakuko in this arena crying to herself, and yes, this turns into a boss fight as we see this nightmarish manifestation of Sakuko born to life in this area. We fight her as she continually calls us a traitor. After the fight, we are then saved by Foxman, who comes out, tanks a few hits like a Giga Chad, and dispels the evil spirit of Sakuko from the area. We enter further and deeper into the shrine world, being told that we are entering sacred ground, and so we cleanse ourselves with some special water. However, interestingly enough, when Hinako approaches, she sees lava, and as we try to cleanse ourselves, we somehow ingest some of the lava, and then Foxmask just stares at us as we struggle. What a weirdo. With that, we transition back into the real world, and Rinko, that jealous bitch, takes no blame and says we just blacked out and fell down the stairs. Yeah, right, buddy. With the friends ready, everyone makes their way towards the mountain path. However, as we go through the town to get towards that path, we see the red vegetation growing even more further throughout the town, invading everything, as more and more monsters are seen. Shu decides that we take the school path towards the mountains, and so we go back to school. As we arrive at the school, we see that the back path gate is locked, and so we try to find a way to get a key, which is found in the school. When we get to the school, Shu and Rinko stay behind as Rinko is pretty tired, so it is up to us to find the key. Shu wants to go with Hinako, but Rinko pushes him back. As we go around the school, we see a lot of notes scattered around, giving a bit of context as to the relationships between the friends. We see a lot of notes from Rinko suggesting that she may have hated Hinako's presence around Shu. And we also find out that Rinko was writing love letters to Shu, which were unopened. Ouch, that's gotta hurt, girl. After we find the key, Shu and Rinko suggest that we take a break while they look around the area and keep watch. And as we do that, we transition back to the Dark Shrine world. This is where the game starts to get very interesting, as Foxman tells us that now we need to bid our farewells. Now, what does bidding farewell mean? Well, when we get into the next area, we see Rinko in a cage on top of some lava. Yes, we have to find a way to drop that cage and burn Rinko to death alive. As we find the key items to cause this to happen, we see a lot more insights into Rinko as a character. We even go into a manifestation of her room built by this Dark Shrine world, where we see a lot of the crazy attachment that Rinko had towards Shu. as well as the hate that Rinko had towards us because we were around Shu so much. After we complete finding the key items, we burn Rinko to death. Right in front of our eyes. And interestingly enough, Hinako stares at Rinko in a deep, cold way, not even saying a single word towards her as she burns to death. We then also find another room in the area, and this one is Sakuko's room. In this part of the area, we learn a lot more about Sakuko too. The fact that she had a phobia of the dark, and the fact that she would write notes saying that she hated Hinako too, because she thought that Hinako would say bad things about her behind her back. We then see Sakuko locked up in a cage in a darkly lit room, with the candlelight being the only source of light. Now, you would think we would save her, sort of, right? Well, no. In this instance, we take out the lights in the room with a puzzle and lock her in her dark fate. While Sakuko screams for help, wanting to leave, Hinako does nothing, giving that same cold stare as she gave towards Rinko. She turns back and coldly leaves the room, again saying nothing. Meanwhile, Sakuko in the background, panicking in total fear. And oh boy, in the Japanese dub was that scream terrifying as we locked her up in the darkness. God, at that time when I heard that scream, it was bone-chilling. And it shocked me too. I mean, this is your friend. And yes, she may have hated you, but she did it in the wrong ways. It wasn't the same way as Rinko, but still, to condemn her to that fate, I knew from then on, something was definitely not right with Hinako. We then enter a big door and find Shu's prized possessions laid out in front. 2 of the items are missing, which, by the way, one of which is a drawing of Hinako with bad slurs against her. And that's one of Shu's prized possessions. That picture with slurs against your partner. The second key item that we need to get is a Space Wars magazine, again relating to the fact that Shu and Hinako would play Space Wars together when they were young. Oh, and did I forget to mention that as we try to find those, we fight this monstrosity. After we find the prized possessions, we find Shu chained above, saying to Hinako that whatever decision she makes, he will be accepting of it. And, well, what does Hinako do? Well, she says nothing, gives the cold stare, and then suffocates Shu. Just like that. And, well, that's her friend's gone. I wonder if that's the bidding of farewells that was tasked by her. Straight after, we see Foxman outside the door, and then we transition back to the fog world. That point in the game is where things really get interesting and really makes you question in shock as to what the hell happened. We soon wake up and find ourselves abandoned by our friends. I wonder why. And we find our way outside of the school and see that the cage is open to go to the mountain path. So we take the mountain path, and we actually then get chased by the fog monster again. Actually twice. Straight after we leave the school, and then straight before we enter Shu's house, which is one of the places that Shu and the team decided to meet up at. We arrive at Shu's house, and there's a lot to talk about near Shu's house, but we'll talk about that later. But anyways, we arrive, and we see that they're not there. Only to then be stopped by the fog monster, and this time we have a very good close-up look. Well, the arm of that fog monster. We then proceed to be knocked out, once again, and return back to the Dark Shrine world, where Hinako says to the Foxman, I will become the perfect woman for you. We then take part in 3 rituals. And now things just begin to get crazy. In the first ritual, we cut our arm off. Yes, Hinako cuts her arm off and replaces it with this arm, which, by the way, is the arm that the fox monster had. It is the exact same. In the second ritual, we get a certain sign imprinted on our back, fusing with our flesh. And then in the third ritual, the top of Hinako's face is cut off, well, the skin of it, and is replaced with a fox mask. And from that point onwards, Hinako says that she has been reborn. We then continue the ceremony, and at this point, I even pointed it out that it looked more like some sort of special marriage ceremony, especially with the way we were holding Foxman's hand, and the lines of guests awaiting us as we entered the special altar room, only to then be crashed out by the appearance of Rinko. Yes, that creature right there on your screen is Rinko, another evil manifestation of it, not surprisingly made up with magma and lava and doing fire attacks since we burned her. But we have to fight Rinko, set our sights away from her, move on from her, forget about her, make her forget about us. A lot of things happen in this sequence alone. We see the doll again, warning us, reminding us that our name is Shimizu Hinako. And then we have an identity crisis. Are we Shimizu Hinako, or are we something else simply known as Hinako? From this point on in the game, and the journal actually enforces this idea, we start to understand what's going on. The events that happened when we killed our friends and bid farewell, it's because this Hinako is different. Again, we'll explain more about this later on, but now it seems that we are dealing with 2 sides of Hinako's psyche. We have Shimizu Hinako, which is the one we see in the fog world back in the town of Ebisugaoka, and then we have Hinako, this different form of her, accepting some sort of special spiritual marriage with this fox dude. We wake up back in the town of Ebisugaoka, and we hear that the phone is ringing at Shu's house. We answer it, and it is our mother, who's telling us to return home, while in the background we hear Shu and Rinko, admittedly in a bit of a struggle, and we hear Rinko scream. So we try to return back, only to then confront our sister, Junko. Junko has been seen a few times in the story, watching over us, telling us things in an ominous, cryptic way, and then we finally see her face. Well, her masked face. She has a admittedly creepy mask, and then proceeds to tell us that the decision we make is ours and only ours to do. We've heard a lot about this in the story, about Hinako having to make a choice, a decision, one that could influence her future. But you may question and ask yourself, is it got to do with that spiritual marriage that we are doing in the Dark Shrine world? We then rush our way towards back home, flowers ever present in the area, taking over the town further and further. There's this one moment as we're trying to go back to our house through the town that we see the park is untouched by the flowery mess. We see a vision of a past, a memory of a certain moment in time where there was this young boy who got bit by a fox and then saved by this young girl. The boy thanks the girl and says that his name is Kotoyuki, and then asks the girl what her name is, which is revealed to be Shimizu Hinako. Keep that scenario and that memory in mind for later on in the video. We return back to the house and we find that everything is distorted, Silent Hill magic doing its thing, where space and time doesn't even matter. As we go through the house and complete some of the puzzles, we see certain memories of our relationship with our parents. This area gives a lot of insight into the relationship between Hinako's parents and Hinako herself. We see that the father was very abusive, very angry and mean towards not only Hinako, but also Hinako's mum, Kimie. After completing some puzzles, we then enter Hinako's room. And then Hinako and Shimizu Hinako meet. Yes, the two psyches, the two sides of this character interact with each other. We have one Hinako who just wants to live the life that she prefers, that she likes, her own life. And then we have the other Hinako, someone who hates everything, who wants to destroy everything, harboring hatred in her heart, saying that both sides will have to fight each other to the death. We then leave and are able to enter a special room where we see the 3 hanging corpses of Hinako's friends lying there. We then see Hinako's parents, and then we proceed to fight them. The trauma returning to Hinako's mind of that one time in her life where Hinako's dad threw a knife towards her. The memories resurfacing, the trauma ever present, and now it made it worse in the fact that we have to fight both of our parents, not just the dad, but also the mum, and we'll talk a lot more about that later on when we go into the themes and the character analysis. After fighting mum and dad in their twisted form, they leave and we go to follow them, only to find them being grabbed by this creature who is the fog monster. We actually now see the fog monster in a lot more detail close up, and it proceeds to kill our parents. We then black out and we go back into the Dark Shrine world. We do a puzzle, and then we meet Junko once again in that world, who tells us, "Have you killed it?" By it, she means the Shimizu Hinako. Again, we'll go into a lot more detail about that when we do the character analysis and the themes. Hinako hasn't fully killed the Shimizu Hinako yet, and then Junko proceeds to threaten the Hinako, saying that if you don't kill your other side, I will kill you myself. That is our own sister saying that to us. After completing some puzzles in the area, we then proceed to the final part of the ritual, which, by the way, involves some rings, which again goes back into the themes of marriage and how this could be some sort of spiritual marriage situation here with the fox mask. But that proceeds, and while that happens, we awaken back in the town. The mess is everywhere. Everyone that Hinako loved or cared about or knew in the town is gone. It is just her and the monsters. We then confront the fog monster, and then the fog monster kills us. Like, full on. We were no match for it. And then we go back to the Dark Shrine world, and then we see the confirmation of what's going on with these ceremonies. The Hinako in that shrine world is transformed into the fog monster. It is actually us, our inner self, coming into reality, taking over us, taking over our psyche. This version of Hinako makes her way back to her parents' house, going through all the red vegetation, the flowers taking over the area. The doll is seen many times as well, confronting this Hinako, trying to stop her. But we resist, continue to go onwards. And then we meet our parents again and kill them again. I feel like in this situation it's more of a time loop situation where we kill them. Again, Silent Hill magic doing its thing where time doesn't matter, space doesn't matter. It's all sort of a mix of chaos, sort of, really. We then wake up in the Dark Shrine world again, but right at the start of it. Basically like at the beginning of the game when we first entered the Dark Shrine world. But what's different is that this is more likely Shimizu Hinako, now back at the Dark Shrine world. It's sort of like a roles being switched. The Hinako of our psyche has infiltrated our real world and is in the town of Ebisugaoka, while Shimizu Hinako is now in the Dark Shrine world, fighting for her way back to her life, getting the life back that was taken from her. We traverse through the areas, defeating some of the monsters, and then we enter the shrine altar room again. We confront our sister too, asking her why she went on their side. Hinako is then seen to be going through some sort of panic attack, overwhelmed by what's going on, the situation at hand, and honestly I don't blame her. It's a lot that has happened. She is then seen taking those pills. It is the same pills that Shu gave to us at the start of the game. The red pills that we use to heal, we've been using it all the time as we play. Our sister tries to stop us from taking those pills, but we push her aside and she then just freezes and disappears. And in that moment, we then confront the altar, which, by the way, can I add, she is confronting that same puzzle that we did for the first time ever when we entered the Dark Shrine world. I feel like this puzzle has a lot of meaning. We then proceed to destroy everything on the table in a fit of anger. I mean, I wouldn't blame her too. And then we face the fog monster, our inner self, Hinako, the person who is trying to take over our psyche, our mind, our freedom of life. We confront it and we fight it, and it is revealed that its name is actually Shiramuku, the thing that we fight. Which, by the way, Shiramuku, by the way, is a traditional Shinto Japanese wedding dress that the female bride wears at a Shinto wedding. We fight our inner self and we beat it, and then we go crazy and everything just goes haywire and we just run out. This scene right now that plays is very interesting and important because as we are leaving the shrine, we see pills everywhere. In fact, if you check your inventory while you're running, you see that we have over 100 pills out of nowhere. We are running away in a fit of craziness as we hear voices in the background. Reality distorts itself as we run around, going from places to places we've been before. We even hear the fox mask asking, "What have you done? Why are you doing this? I did everything for you." We then also hear our friends' voices in the background. The voices! They're everywhere! We then enter a hallway which is filled to the brim with pills as we hear police sirens outside. And as we go outside, we approach the red mess. Chaos everywhere as we start to go full on crazy mode. And then they roll the credits. I will admit that ending did seem very anticlimactic and just put onto us. We actually do see an after scene credit where we see the police at the scene of a crime. They mention the pills, they mention someone in a wedding dress running away, 20 years old. That's us. They were talking about us. We had gone into an overdose psychotic breakdown. And what's worse, this happened at Hinako's wedding. Yes, this game takes place on the same day that Hinako was to be wed to somebody. That somebody is Foxmask, aka Kota Yuki. Yes, that same boy that we saved that one time in the park memory. That is who we were being wedded to that day. That is the identity of Fox Mask. Again, I know this is all being revealed to you out of nowhere right now. I'm very bad at this already, I feel like. But we will explain more about this because we still have a lot to talk about. Yes, that story recap was pretty long. There's just so much, man. But that is the story recap. We basically went into an overdose breakdown and we killed people because we went crazy. It's the pills, chat. The pills caused it. Also, another point of information that we should address is that when you play this game for the first time, you are locked to this ending. There are 5 endings in Silent Hill F, and you are locked to this specific ending for the first time. You can't get any other of the endings, you have to play New Game Plus to unlock them. Okay, holy shit, I'm realizing this story recap took such a long time. I did my best, guys. There is a lot to unpack in this story because every event has a lot of importance to what we need to talk about in terms of analyzing things. So what we're going to do now, we are going to analyze the characters in a bit more detail, and it will explain as to why certain events happened in the game. So let's start off with our main character, Shimizu Hinako. Shimizu Hinako is around 20 years old at the time of the events of this game, so she's in her early teenager years really. And she used to be very athletic when she was a child. She would be part of the track and field club at school. So clearly she was the athletic type, which is something you wouldn't really associate with women at that time period, because remember, this game is set in 60s Japan, at a time period where, you know, gender roles were a little bit different. But yeah, she was the athletic type. She even admits that she was better at sports than most of the other girls at her school, that is. Another important thing about Hinako is that she would play with boys a lot, and she accepted that and admitted to that. And she enjoyed it, most notably, as I mentioned before, when Hinako and Shu would play Space Wars together. It was mostly those two that would play together in the fields, in the rice fields, in and around town, just having fun. So immediately we can see she stands out a lot more differently than what woman would be portrayed as typically in that time period, in that part of the world. She's someone who would hang around with boys, who would be very athletic. You would sort of associate with these ideals and, you know, these traits to be more masculine, especially for people in that time period, because of course that time period and this time period is way different, especially when you think about the western and eastern parts of the world. Now, Shimizu Hinako also is proud about that fact that she is different and she wants to live the life that she sees fit. She wants to make her own decisions. She wants to have freedom of choice, freedom of life, because she wants to enjoy it. She even admits that she doesn't like being bossed around, being told what to do, and she does have a rebellious tendency. And we see that sometimes in the interactions with her parents. For example, there is one memory that you can actually unlock in New Game Plus where Hinako is trampling a girl's skirt and dress because she doesn't like it. Of course, again showing the fact that she's not the typical woman of that time period. And her mom comes in saying, "Oh, why are you destroying this dress? Blah, 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 blah." So she, she has her own mindset. She has her own ideals. She wants to live the life she wants. She wants to have choices of what she wants to wear, how she wants to act, stuff like that. So again, and we'll talk about this later, but again, this game shows a lot of emphasis on the themes of womanhood. Now, it's really interesting because Silent Hill hasn't done this theme portrayal for the first time. Silent Hill 3, I would say, is the first example of the themes of womanhood being portrayed, especially since in Silent Hill 3, that is the first game where we have a female protagonist, Heather Mason. But I feel like in Silent Hill F, there's a lot more heavy themes of womanhood in this game, portraying how women are supposed to grow and live in Japan in the 60s, in that time period, in the environment that you live in, where traditions are highly, highly important, and following those traditions is crucial. However, what happens when you grow up in an environment like that, and instead of following those rules that are set to be put on you, you decide to go your own path? You want to have your own free will. You want to do what you like to do. Well, unfortunately, in periods like that and in a situation like that, you are faced with a lot of judgment, which is seen, and we see that happen in the game. Most notably with the interactions I think Rinko and Hinako would have regarding Shu, which we'll go into more detail when we go to Rinko's character analysis. But sometimes when Hinako and Rinko would interact, Rinko would be like, "Oh, did you know that sometimes you act like a man? That's not really normal for a woman in this time period." Sort of something like that. So she would be questioning how Hinako acts and behaves, and that shows the judgmental nature. If you were to go against the ideals that you are set to have in that time, you would be judged. And Rinko shows that. And actually we see that even at the start of the game when in that childhood memory where Hinako said, "Girls don't want to hang out with me since I play with boys a lot." Again, that shows signs of judgment, of being judgmental towards someone who is different than everyone else. Now here we go with my personal experiences part of this video. I too have had experiences of this where I'm different than everybody else when I grew up, and I would also be judged for how I am. So I definitely feel Hinako in this instant, because it would definitely make Hinako, feel a little bit uncomfortable. And we saw that sometimes when they would interact with each other, when Hinako and Rinko would interact with each other, she would butt in saying, "Hey, we're just partners, yada yada yada." But you could see that Hinako felt a little bit down, a little bit discouraged, a little bit, uncomfortable. Because again, being judged for being different is something that shouldn't be a thing. But sadly, in that time period, it would be, because that time period is very different. Rules are strict. Gender rules are very strict, especially in 60s Japan, in Asia. You're going to hear me talk about not just Japan, but associating it with Asian cultures in general. Because yes, this game is set in Japan, but these sort of messages that were sent in the game and these themes, I was shocked to find that they're very similar to all parts of Asia, really, because especially I'm more Southern Asian. So that's why I'm kind of expanding it, not to just how it is in Japan at that time, but all of Asia, really. And of course, if anyone who's watching this video is actually Japanese or has Japanese ethnicity, I'd really like to hear your thoughts, because I really am interested as to how you think Japanese life is or was at that time, or even is at the moment right now. Because I definitely feel like this game also does teach a lot about, the different ways of life in that part of the world. Now let's talk about the relationship that Hinako has with her parents. Her parents, she doesn't like. Especially the dad, because of the way, again, her dad is very abusive. He would shout at her, sometimes even be violent, aggressively violent. There is one vision that we see in the game where Hinako and her dad are fighting, and the dad throws a knife, and luckily Hinako dodges away from it, but it got that bad to the point that a knife had to be thrown, a weapon that could have killed your daughter. That is messed up, that is dark, and we see how dark the relationship is from those visions when we were in the house level of the game. Hinako also didn't like her mother, and the reason that was the case is because Hinako would see her mum also getting abused by the dad. There was that one vision where, the father, Kanta, would throw food off the table because he said, oh, you didn't cook it right. How do you make this? Like, how could you not make this soup properly? You're useless. And the mother was actually just saying sorry, being complicit, not standing up for herself while she was being verbally attacked for how she cooked food. And Hinako was the one who fought back, saying, you shouldn't behave like this. Mum, can you please do something about that? And then the mother was not having it. She just said, no, child, you can't do that. Behave yourself. It was just a mistake. And because of that, Hinako doesn't like her mother because of the fact that she thinks that her mother doesn't stand up for herself, that she's not strong. Again, showing the differences in how Hinako is as a woman compared to her mother. Her mother and her daughter, complete different ends of the spectrum, really. So she doesn't like her parents. She doesn't enjoy living with them. She argues with them. Of course, more so with her dad. It even got to the point where we even see a note which shows how much Hinako hated her parents. Although that note might not be written by her, but more so her other psyche. Yes, let's talk about Hinako's other side, which we see in this game. Hinako. Simply Hinako, without the first name Shimizu. Now, Hinako is seen as the opposite of Shimizu Hinako, especially later in the game. And we see that transition when we observe Hinako in the Dark Shrine world killing off her friends. In that dark, cold way, the cold stare she gave to them all, not saying a single word, as if she treated her friends as prisoners. That just goes to show that in her inner self, there is hatred in her heart. She hates her friends because she also thinks that her friends are useless and mean nothing to her. She takes revenge after finding out the notes that her friends would write about her. Even the shoe picture, which had Hinako drawn with slurs, which even surprised me because I always saw Shu and, Hinako as very close, that Shu would never ever leave her side. He even admits that he would never ever leave her side. Yet we see this as a prized possession too in the Shu dungeon, I'm going to call it, which is very interesting. And then we also see how Hinako in the Dark Shrine world acts when close to the fox mask. And I already mentioned that the whole point of the game was showing, Hinako's dedication and devotion towards the fox mask, towards a man, towards marriage. Now, Shimizu Hinako, her childhood self, herself that we see at the start of the game, is someone who doesn't show typical woman roles, which also includes the fact that she did not want to get married. Because what happened at the start of the game, the reason they were fighting at the start of the game with the parents is because the dad wanted to marry Hinako off to a wealthier family. And we'll talk about that more when we talk about Fox Mask in more detail. But essentially, Hinako was to be married off, an arranged marriage. But Hinako did not want that. She doesn't want that because she thinks her freedom of choice, her freedom of life, her free will be taken away when married to a man. However, in the Dark Shrine world, when we are met with Hinako, her inner self, her other side of her psyche, she's the opposite. She accepts the role that she is given. She accepts the marriage proposal with the Fox Mask man. And you could actually see that from the rituals that happen in the Dark Shrine world. The first ritual, where she has her arm cut off, replaced with a fox arm, that could be symbolic of her giving her hand in marriage, accepting the role given to her to get married off. In the second ritual, when she is being branded with the sign on her back, almost shows the idea of being devoted to a family, a new family, because that's essentially what happens when you are married. You are devoting yourself to a new family because, of course, the bride goes with the groom's family and stays with the groom's family. That also is symbolic of that when the mark is placed on her behind her back. It's also something I think very specific to maybe Japanese culture, because again, in Japan, clans are a very big thing and a very big part of Japanese history and traditions. So in a way, it's also showing that, this Hinako is accepting her role of being accepted into this new clan, the Fox clan, being wedded to the Fox Mask Man. And then in the third ritual, where she has her top of her face skin taken off and replaced with a fox mask, is possibly symbolic of showing that, I'm accepting that this male is going to be taking over my life. I give my heart and soul towards you. And actually, Hinako says that after the rituals, after she gets these superpowers even, that she is accepting and giving her mind and soul to the fox mask, which is kind of symbolic of saying, when a woman gets married, she is giving her heart and soul to the person that they are marrying. So again, we see the different ends of that psyche, especially at the end too, when Shimizu Hinako and Hinako confront each other. We have Shiromuku, which is the name of the final boss that we fight in the first ending, which is her essentially in a wedding dress. This is a typical wedding dress associated with Shintoism. So in Shinto weddings, Shinto traditional weddings, it would be this sort of dress that would be worn by the bride during the marriage ceremony. So again, very symbolic of the message of marriage, of the themes of marriage, of the symbolism there. And since we were talking about Hinako just now, let's move on to our next character. Let's talk about the groom, Foxman. So Fox Mask is very interesting in this story. It is revealed later on as we read notes that the identity of Fox Mask is actually Kotoyuki. Yes, the same Kotoyuki that we saw in the park memory vision, where a young Shimizu Hinako helped the boy after being bit by a fox. Very interesting too that it happened after being bit by a fox, by the way. We'll talk more about the fox imagery when we talk more about the themes and a bit more about the town itself. But essentially, Fox Mask, or aka Kotoyuki, is essentially someone we find out to be related to a very special clan known as the Tsuneki clan that we read about later on in the game. Now, the Tsuneki family is very wealthy and rich, and they profit off of their business practices, as we see in notes later in the game. What throws me off, however, is one note that we see later in the game, which mentions that, quote, each time the world falls to pieces, the Tsuneki's treasury only grows larger, and also, the Tsunekis are happily waiting for misfortune to strike so they can line their pockets. Now again, it is important to note that these are said to be rumors regarding the family, but it does leave some questions in mind as to what the real deeper acts are going on in the Tsuneki clan. Another thing to point out is that again, Kotoyuki Tsuneki is part of a wealthy clan, and he's having to marry Shimizu Hinako, which I would say, and we can all agree, is from more of a poorer middle-class family. So this is already another interesting point to notice, is that we're in a situation where we see a marriage between a wealthy male and a somewhat poor middle-class female. It also kind of reminds me of another note that we read in the Dark Shrine, where it mentions that one of the heirs of the Tsuneki family married a young, poor housemaid called Sachi. And I've heard some rumors about how Sachi might just be Kotoyuki's mother. But I haven't looked too much into that, but it's a rumor, and it may be true, maybe not. Another thing about Fox Mask, or Kotoyuki, is how we first see him as early in the game, and honestly throughout the game really. He's someone who is seen as very kind to Hinako, very caring of Hinako. Someone who is seen to be very understanding of her, possibly. And it may show that Kotoyuki may be representing the male who is very caring towards their woman that they're going to marry, compared to situations like we have with Hinako's dad, who is very abusive towards Hinako's mum. It also kind of reminds me of the relationship that Hinako has with Shu back in the Fog Town, although we know that's not romantic, and Hinako admits it in her journal too, that she doesn't want to see the relationship between her and Shu as romantic, but more so as long life friends. Maybe Kotoyuki represents the ideal male in a situation like this, and we gotta remember that Hinako in the Dark Shrine world once mentions, before entering the rituals, that she wants to become the perfect woman for Kotoyuki. Again, Hinako in the Dark Shrine world representing a female wanting to adopt the normal traditions that are expected of a woman of that time period. And lastly, we have to talk about the fox imagery. Now, I haven't mentioned this too much because I want to expand on it later in this video, but the fox imagery is very, very prevalent in this game. And essentially it is because Ebisugaoka, the town itself, worships a deity known as Inari-sama, who is a fox goddess. And Inari-sama is a god who is seen as someone who puts old and weary tools to rest. Now, I may be dumb, but the term tools has kind of confused me. What do we mean when we mean tools in this situation? Do we mean actual objects, or do we mean people? It's interesting too that in the journal about Rinko, there was once a time where Rinko talks about how she interpreted the relationship between Shu and Hinako as a tool. I would really like to know in the comments what you guys think the term tool means in this scenario, because I honestly am not very sure. So I'll admit to that, I'm not very sure. But once again, that is also something that is commonly read about and heard about in this game regarding the Inari-sama faith. We also see, again, the amount of fox statues in the Dark Shrine world, and those are depictions of Inari-sama. And in the town of Ebisugaoka, there are a lot of folklore regarding the imagery of foxes. One instance, we learn about the fact that foxes can have the power to spirit away girls to be wedded, which is kind of similar to what happens in the Dark Shrine, isn't it? And of course, it's not really surprising that we have a lot of fox imagery in this game, as of course, in real life, kitsune lore is very prominent in the traditions of Japan, and a lot of folklore in real life Japan is based around the stories on foxes. But we always still have to wonder, we gotta remember too, that foxes are seen as cunning animals, very mischievous animals. And despite not seeing that mischievousness from Foxmask in this game, because I personally do really think that Foxmask is very caring of Hinako. I remember in that one cutscene in the rituals where Hinako was having her face cut off, Foxmask was by her side, seeing the pain that Hinako was going through and trying to comfort her. But you always gotta wonder, is there something cunning behind that man? I guess we'll never know. Now then, as I mentioned earlier, Foxmask's relationship with Hinako in the Dark Shrine world does remind me of how Shu is like with Shimizu Hinako back in Ebisugaoka. So let's segue over to talking about Shu Iwai. So the Iwai family is known for their high level of knowledge in medicine and treatments. So Shu comes from a family of physicians, and they would treat a lot of the people of Ebisugaoka when dealing with health problems. So a very well-respected family who could help out people with certain needs. Now, Shu is someone who is very specifically involved in learning about plant biology and herbology. We actually see this when we go to his house. We have the large garden with plants growing, and we also have a very suspicious lake by his house with some white flowers, which we will talk about later in this video. But that's the basic gist about Shu and his background. Now, Shu sees Hinako as a partner more so than a girl. He also has the same ideas as Hinako in the sense that there should be no problem with having to be friends and playing with people of the opposite sex. So you can already see how Shu and Hinako would make very good partners together. And again, they would play Space Wars together, their childhood game. They loved playing together. Now, I want you guys to remember that one cutscene at the beginning of the game where Shu hands over the pills. Now, we have to remember, after knowing what happens in the story, that it is those same pills which caused Hinako to go in her psychosis and started murdering people at the wedding. And what's fucked up about this is that Shu knew the detriments of taking this medicine. Whether he knew to the extent of how dangerous it would be, well, we don't fully know for sure, but he definitely should have had an understanding. So, do we put the blame on him for what happens at the end of the first ending? Again, Shu is someone who has always said to Hinako that he will always be by her side and always be understanding of the decision she makes. Now, this is in regards to Hinako's wedding, because again, Hinako and Shu have a very close bond with each other. And when a woman has to get married, she kind of has to leave that behind as she moves over to the new family, aka the Tsuneki family in this case. So of course, Shu would have some sort of certain feelings in regard to the decision Hinako makes after finding out that she will be married, which also kind of goes into the themes of friendships, which we'll talk about when we talk about the themes in a lot more detail. Now, I want to talk more about the pills a little bit, because it's important to mention why Shu gave those pills in the first place. The main reason why Shu gave those pills to Hinako is because Hinako would suffer from migraines and headaches because of the mental stress that she would endure because of the environment in which she grew up in. Of course, being a different woman compared to everyone else makes you feel judged by everyone, and that type of judgment can put stress on you and put mental anguish too. So, Shu would help Hinako out by giving these pills to her to relieve that pain and those feelings. Shu also mentions that Hinako would come to Shu a lot, not only for treatment, but also to just vent to him, to talk to him about the problems that she faces. And Shu would also be very comforting to that fact, always looking out for her, very much like Foxmask, really. Shu genuinely wanted to help Hinako out, but maybe that help came at a cost. Maybe Shu thought that by giving these particular pills to Hinako, that Hinako would snap out of it and get back to reality and maybe cause her to change her decision. But no, Hinako went crazy and killed people at a wedding. Not the brightest idea, was it, Shu? We see a lot more of this type of idea of Shu wanting to get Hinako out of this marriage proposal, especially in the second ending, where we actually technically fight him. But I will also argue it's more likely that Shu got possessed by the Tsukumogami being, which is kind of part of the history of the deities in Ebisugaoka, which we'll actually go into a lot more detail when we talk about the themes and the stuff like that. So in a sense, Shu kind of represents the one friend in life who just doesn't want to let go of friendships. Someone who wants to stay by their friend no matter what. Speaking of friends, let's talk about another one of Hinako's friends who also wants to stay very close by Hinako, but can't. And that is Sakuko. So Sakuko is one of those friends who is very traditional and spiritual. She is part of the family who runs a shrine in town known as the Senensugi Shrine. However, this shrine is not as much used or visited by residents of the town anymore because of how much it got worn down. And this somewhat has to do in relation to another part of Ebisugaoka's history where the people of the town used to worship the divine cedar tree. Again, this is all part of the deity history. Ebisugaoka has had a lot of changes in deities, and again, we will talk about this later, but it wasn't much visited, and soon it led to her family not really caring about the shrine anymore. However, Sakuko still cared, still wanting to be part of the Senensugi Shrine traditions. Another interesting thing that we learn about in the journal is that Sakuko would mention that she would be visited by certain gods and spirits in her dreams. And she would mention that this god in her dreams would talk about how their followers were taken from it, which may allude to the idea of how people moved away from the cedar tree faith and moved and shifted towards the Inari faith. Another thing about Sakuko, which we actually learn about when we go to her room area in the Dark Shrine, is that she had a fear of the dark, and she would also be seen as someone who's lonely. Until she met Hinako, and from then on, Hinako and Sakuko would become very close friends as well. Sakuko made sure that Hinako kept a promise, and that promise is that Hinako would never ever leave Sakuko's side, and they would always stay close to each other. However, we know that that doesn't happen, and that at the end of the day, Hinako has to get wedded away. Now, this may just be the reason why Sakuko calls Hinako a traitor in the game. It's because of the fact that, again, because Hinako has to get wedded away to Foxmask, that she has to leave everything behind, including her friends, including Sakuko. Now, Sakuko could not handle this, and we read this in the notes, that she has a fear that Hinako would leave her, and also a fear that Hinako talks badly about her behind her back. And because of that, she then says that she hates Hinako, she despises her, she wants her gone. Even saying at one point that I wish she tripped and broke all of her bones in her legs. Sadly, things can't stay the same forever, and promises cannot always be kept, and this is one of those examples, a very tough and rough example too. And of course we see at the start of the game, when the fog monster invades Ebisugaoka, that Sakuko is the first to die, and maybe that's why she specifically dies at the start. It's showing that Sakuko's promise is having to be broken now because Hinako is going to be wedded away. Now, of course, we do see her die at the start of the game, but we do see her 2 more times. And one of those instances is a boss fight. Observe how Sakuko in the Dark Shrine boss fight looks like. She has the typical Miko robe, representing the fact that she is very spiritual and she would run the Senensugi Shrine. Take notice of one of the weapons that she wields during that fight. It's sort of like a bell weapon. It makes a noise when she moves it around, and that's very reminiscent of the bells that are used during a Kagura dance in Shinto faith. A Kagura dance is a type of slow-moving dance that is done by shrine maidens as part of a ritual in Shinto beliefs. Another interesting thing I did and found out while researching this stuff is that another one of the props used in Kagura dances is sprigs of a flower known as sakaki. And sakaki is one of the most common trees in the second layer of the evergreen oak forests. It is considered sacred to Japanese Shinto faith. And the reason I find it very interesting is because of the name, sakaki. You know, sakaki, sakuko, maybe some links there, which is actually very cool. The idea of the Kagura dance is very prominent with something like Sakugo, especially since, she's a Miku at the shrine at Senensugi, and stuff like this would be very common to her. Actually, after you complete the first ending and enter New Game Plus, you can actually go to the Senensugi shrine and see inside the shrine someone doing a Kagura dance in a creepy sort of way, because in a split second, it looks like she explodes? That's the best way I can describe it, I don't know. But it could be safe to say that maybe that person in that shrine doing that dance could be Sakugo. Maybe a hint at the fact that Sakugo has reawakened as this dark, evil spirit, which is what we see in that boss fight. It is more so a dark spirit of Sakugo having to be fought by Hinako. Maybe it symbolizes the guilt that Hinako has that she can't save Sakugo, that she couldn't save Sakugo at that moment, and that she is deemed a traitor and that she has to leave Sakugo to go and be wedded. And again, the other time that we see Sakugo is in the Dark Shrine when we have to bid farewell to our friends. We leave her in the dark, in a cold, twisted manner as she screams for help, reminding us in her final breaths that we are a traitor because we left her to go and be wedded with Foxmask. Again, she has a fear of the dark, and we see that shown when we say goodbye to her. Another thing I want to point out again is that fear of the dark, she has a phobia of the dark, nyctophobia to be specific. And seeing that final cutscene with her as we say goodbye and leave her in the dark, the terror in her voice, that final screech when we say goodbye to her as we leave her, very scary and chilling, and it just shows the extent to how phobias are for some people. They can be very dangerous and very serious. They are considered a mental health issue. It is part of the DSM-5 classification after all, and that phobias have a detrimental effect on our body. There is one instance in New Game Plus where you can go into the school and enter a room where there is a chalkboard filled with people's names on it, some of which include Hinako's friends and family members. Sakugo is on there, and it mentions that her cause of death was from a heart attack, which is probably the most likely scenario of what happened after we left her in that dark room. She hyperventilated. She was having a panic attack, and that caused a heart attack, which may have ended her life. Very, very dark indeed. Now let's talk about the final friend, Nishida Rinko. Now, I find Rinko very interesting. The way they wrote her character is very, very interesting, because I don't know if this type of idea is commonly thought about in our day and age when it comes to friendships. Now, Rinko is someone who I would see in the game as portraying the typical woman role, the stereotypical role that women should play. She is seen as someone who is into stuff like fashion and magazines and gossip. She shows those traits of how a woman should behave like at that time period. Now, the biggest thing about Rinko in the story is the fact that she has a crush, or had a crush, on Shu. And she also discussed this with Hinako at one point, as we see in the journal entry for her. And Hinako said, well, hey, if you want to go out with him, that's fine, but if you don't feel comfortable going into the dirt and being rough since we play Space Wars, then you're going to have a hard time. And yes, Rinko definitely would have a hard time, because those are activities, again, which would not have been associated with women at that time period. So, when Rinko saw this and saw that Shu and Hinako would hang out more often and play Space Wars together, she would turn to the next best thing: becoming a jealous bitch. I don't think anyone likes Rinko in this story. She is someone who is overcome with jealousy, and that jealousy, you could argue, turns into envy, turns into hatred. It is also very messed up, because at the end of the day, Hinako and Rinko were still friends, and they've even had arguments in the past before, but they always came back strong and came back talking to each other again. But what happens when the limits is reached? How many times do you have to fight each other to become friends again? It's that scary thought that if you're in a friend group and you have someone who doesn't like you and is jealous of you, it's a rough feeling. And it's definitely, I would say, something which could be argued to be a fear. A fear of the fact that a friend that you know and are very well known with and close to can sometimes then move away from you because they're jealous, envious, that they have hatred thoughts about you. I myself have that fear, and I did feel for Hinako when we were reading those notes, especially later on in the game when we learned more about Rinko's story, about how Rinko just hated Hinako so much because of how much Hinako was close to Shu. We see how Rinko turns from not being just jealous, but then turning that jealousy into pure hatred. There was that one scenario in her room vision where we see the unsent, crumpled letters where Rinko just says that Hinako should just bug off, leave Shu alone, you're all over the place. It's kind of dark if you think about it, because again, friends turning into enemies like that is a very scary thought to have. How would you feel if you knew that your friend now just totally hated you because of the person you are? Because you're different. It's kind of a classic example of how friendships can become toxic in any given situation. Another thing we see in the game regarding Rinko is how unhealthily attached she is to Shu. We have so many letters seen that she writes to Shu that are probably not even sent or even opened. We gotta remember that one puzzle in the classroom where Rinko would write letters to Shu, but those letters are seen to be unopened. Shu never even opened those letters. It's really ew? Ugh? Is the best way I can describe it sometimes when I was reading those letters. It's just so unhealthy and so parasocial even, you could argue. And another thing about Rinko you could argue as well is that she had a lot of pride. There is one note in the section with Rinko in the Dark Shrine where we enter a vision of the school. And there is a note there where we read about how Rinko became class president. We find out in the journal that she really boasts a lot about the power that she has, saying that she has to look after all these, quote, lost causes. And she also mentions that she has to take care of 2 specific kids in school, which most likely is referring to Hinako and Sakuko. So all in all, she really is just a type of character. And honestly, she gets what she deserves at the end of the day when we burn her in fire. Which is actually kind of interesting because I would say that her sin is envy. And one of the deadly sins, punishments for envy, is to be frozen in ice water. Which is a complete contrast to what we see there where it's more lava. Very interesting. We also fight Rinko as a boss in the Dark Shrine world after we've done the Fox transformation rituals. We see her cloaked in magma, which represents how we burnt her in lava back in the shrine. Her face literally melting off. During the fight too, we see puppets of Rinko spawning on the scene, which is a very interesting thing because I feel like stuff like jealousy, in my personal opinion, can also be formed by the act of inner demons, inner psychological demons, making you think of these bad, evil thoughts. Thoughts of hatred to one another, thoughts of hatred towards everything. Maybe that's what those puppets represent during that fight. Even the journal says that she is covered in the fires of jealousy. She just could not accept the fact that Hinako and Shu were very close to each other, and she was not even willing to let go of her womanly pursuits to be able to play Space Wars with Hinako and Shu. So all in all, Rinko is a very interesting character, a very good character to study psychology on when regarding situations where a friend becomes jealous. She is a very good case study on the idea of jealousy, especially within friend groups. Now, we've talked about the friends, we've talked about Fox Boss, we've talked about Hinako. Lastly, I want to talk about Hinako's family. So we're going to talk about the mum, the dad, and her sister Junko. Let's start with the dad. Now, her dad is called Shimizu Kanta. Now, Kanta was someone who used to work in the fishery business a lot, and once he accumulated a bit more notoriety, he once then left that job to open up a restaurant. However, that restaurant did not succeed and it failed miserably, causing him to go into debt. Now, because of that, it may be assumed that because of those events, Kanta would become more aggressive and more drunk. He would drink a lot, sending out Hinako's mum, Kimie, to get bottles of wine and sake to drink. Hinako says in her journal that his dad would just drink away all the problems in their home. Now, the dad represents the patriarchal husband, someone who has power in the household. Again, very common with the traditions of 60s Japan and in that time period. Men were more dominant in that time. They would be more powerful and they would hold power. And we see that when we interact and see Hinako's dad in cutscenes and memories. And of course, because of that, Hinako absolutely hated her dad. Her dad was very aggressive, very abusive towards Hinako and Hinako's mum, Kimia. Now, I want to talk a lot about something which I was very happy to be able to have been correct on as I played the game. So there's this one instance in the game early on where we are trying to go and find Shu to go to Rinko's house, and we have to find a key in a well. We get attacked by this very large creature, and I want you to take notice of how this creature is like. It is massive, it is very bulbous, it has a large mouth, and it carries and wields a very large sword. The way it moves and attacks is very sluggish, very much swaying around, and that is something I think you could absolutely associate with the dad in that instance, because of the fact, again, Hinako's dad was drunk most of the time, and when you're drunk, you're very much swaying around, you don't have control of your senses, you're pretty burnt out, lost, out of touch, and that's seen by this monster in the way it moves. Now, observe this weapon that the monster has, and that's more or less kind of a representation of what happened in that one scene where Hinako's dad threw a knife on the tatami mat during an argument. That source of trauma would be ingrained into Hinako forever because of how dangerous it got and how bad the situation got, that a knife, a weapon, was thrown towards Hinako. And that is represented when we see that weapon being wielded by the monster. Its massive mouth, saying and screaming, could represent the slurs and the verbal abuse that Hinako's dad would have towards Hinako during arguments. And I was very happy to be right, because we fight the parents in the game, and Hinako's dad transforms into that same sort of creature. So the parallels are very definitely there. Now, what makes him very important in this story is because, of course, he would be the one who would marry Hinako off to a wealthy family such as the Tsunekis, and here is why. Is it not likely that Shimizu Kanta may have had contact with the Tsuneki family and asked them to marry their daughter? And we have to remember that the Tsuneki clan has a history of marrying people in poorer environments. Look at the example with the young heir and Sachie. So, the Tsuneki family would marry Hinako, and in exchange, they would pay off Kanta's debts, and that is what happens. That is the point of the marriage between Shimizu, Hinako, and Kotoyuki. Oh yes, and this is absolutely 100% showing the themes of arranged marriages. Arranged marriages in Asia in general are a very common thing, sadly, and it mostly involves money in situations like these. So something like this would make Hinako hate her dad even more, with the fact that she has no freedom of choice and that Kanta thinks that this is what makes Hinako happy. It technically does, because the Dark Shrine Hinako is happy with that choice. Again, the differences between Shimizu Hinako and Hinako herself and her inner self. Right, that was the dad. Let's talk about the mum. The mum is also very interesting in the story. Hinako hates her mum, and it is because of the fact Hinako's mum doesn't stand up for herself when she faces abuse from Kanta. Of course, women in that time period were not meant to do that because of the patriarchal system set upon families in that time. Every time abuse would be hurled towards her and Hinako would fight back, Kimiya would fight back against Hinako, telling her to stop and behave, because that is not how women behave in that time. Kimiya stays silent in that abuse. She accepts the abuse. She doesn't stand up for herself, something that does not align with Hinako's values. Now, earlier we did compare one of the monsters, the large knife-wielding monster, with Hinako's dad, Kanta. But I want to propose that Kimiya also has a representation seen in one of the monsters in this game. It's the first monster we see, the mannequin dolls. And here's why. Now, the mannequin dolls in the game are seen as having their eyes cut off, or more so, bloated. They can't see. Instead, they smile. Now, let's compare that design to the boss form of Kimiya when we fight the parents. Kimiya is wielding a knife, which is also similar to what we see with the mannequin dolls. She is also smiling, which is what happens with the mannequin dolls that we see, and their eyes are not seen. They are covered by flowers, by the way, in the case with Kimiya in the boss fight. I symbolize the eyes being covered with flowers as a way to show and remind us that, again, Hinako's mum was silent to the abuse that she faced, and she just accepted it with a blind eye, which is represented by the fact that her eyes are covered with flowers, which also could be represented by the mannequin dolls when their eyes are not seen and they're bloated, which is something I find very interesting. I really like it in Silent Hill, where the enemies are psychologically linked to a certain character or characters in the game. I find that that's one of the best traits in Silent Hill games, where it gets its psychological horror from, is that the enemies in the games are not just enemies that are designed because of the purpose of it. They have a meaning to it. They have a purpose. They tell a story. And once again, Silent Hill F does show that with its monster designs. And honestly, huge shout outs to Kara for his designs of the monsters in this game. He was behind the designs for all of the monsters in Silent Hill F, and honestly a very good job, a very good storytelling job with these monsters. So huge shout out to the development team really, and Kara in general, for the monster designs. Another final note I want to talk about the mother is we find a note that Hinako's mom did have to take medication. She was someone who suffered from illnesses, and we actually even see a prescription list of drugs that she would have to take. We don't know what specifically she has. I could be wrong. If you guys know in the comments, do let me know. But she was taking medicine, and she was taking medicine from the Iwais. Whether it was the same pills or another medicine, to me right now is unknown, but another interesting fact about her. And lastly, let's talk about Junko. Junko is someone who is also very mysterious in the story, and I'm still trying to piece how she fits in. Hinako and Junko were very close as sisters when they were young. Junko would always be with Hinako after specific situations, like when Hinako would maybe argue with her parents in certain times. However, one day, Junko got married and had to leave. Now, early on in the game, we do not see Junko's face at all. However, in the first cutscene, where we see the arguments between the parent and Hinako, we do see a picture of her. She's wearing a wedding dress, the same wedding dress known as Shiromuku. We actually also see her normal face, and I say normal face because later on in the game, we don't see her face. Instead, it's her mask face. Now, very interesting, she has a owl mask. Okay, so editor me here. I just want to clarify something. The mask that Junko wears is not an owl mask, which is what I originally thought of, but after finding more stuff about it online, it is not actually an owl mask. It is instead a Karasu Tengu mask. Now, this is a being which is commonly seen in Japanese folklore. So, gotta make that out there. So, not the typical fox mask that you would associate with, like, Hinako. I would interpret this just as symbolizing as the fact that Junko got married off to another family of some sort, maybe another sort of clan, kind of like the Tsunekis. She comes up in situations where she tells Hinako that she needs to make a decision for herself. What is the decision she makes? Now, we do find out later on that Junko is on the side of being wedded, being married. She is on the side of following the traditional roles that women need to take in that time period growing up. What's really interesting is that at the end, we really see how evil she kind of is. I mean, she even threatens to kill the Hinako when she's telling her, have you killed the other's part? The other part referring to killing Shimizu Hinako, her young self. We even then see her when Shiromuku and Shimizu Hinako confront each other, telling Hinako to kill her past self, urging Hinako to move on and follow the path ordained for women. Honestly, at the end of the story, I really didn't like her, especially because of the fact of how threatening she is. She may also symbolize, again, the family pressures. Growing up in an Asian environment, you are having to deal with family pressures, being told what to do. Early on, Junko would be there to support Hinako, but when you grow up, you have to face reality, and you could say Junko faced it and accepted it, and she's trying to urge Hinako to move on and accept the fate that she has, in a threatening way. And that ends the character analysis. I honestly did my best. I wish I could speak more about it, but this video is already very long. So we're now going to move on to the themes. This part could also be pretty long, so strap yourself in. Maybe get a drink of water or something. I sure do. I've been speaking for like hours. God help me. So the themes in Silent Hill F lean very much towards the big idea of womanhood. Again, Silent Hill has explored womanhood before in cases like Silent Hill 3. But in this game, I would say it's the most commonest theme in the story. Having to grow up as a woman, having to grow up in an environment where women and men are seen differently, have separate roles, and are more typically segregated. Having to live in a patriarchal society where men are more dominant than women. Having to conform to societal norms and societal traditions, especially in 60s Japan, where traditions are very important when growing up and being accepted in society. We see gender separation a lot mentioned in the game. There's that one journal entry when we enter the park where Hinako talks about why Showa kids are grown up and told to have separation between girls and boys. That gender separation is seen a lot. Now, of course, as mentioned many times in this video, Hinako plays with boys. She is different. And because she has to play with boys, the girls don't accept her. That is also one of the reasons why Hinako threw away her childhood doll, is because if girls don't accept her, she just won't accept being a girl anymore. And throwing away her doll is a sign of that. She's letting go of her womanly pursuits almost, to hang out with people like Shu a lot more, with the boys, playing Space Wars more often. And the fact that Hinako chooses that path for herself, she is faced with a lot of judgment from people like her friends that we see during notes. Family stress also is something that is seen, again with how the family dynamic is, with the pressure that she has, having to be put in a forced marriage, an arranged marriage situation that she doesn't agree with. Junko being very pressing and urging her to make the decision, the right decision. Threatening her at one point too. Another thing we have to talk about is the idea of traditions and cultures, and what happens when you go against these. Again, 60s Japan, you could argue, was a time where Japan was very much into its folklore, into its traditions, than it may be now in present day. We see that example in people like Sakuko, who is someone who's very spiritual, being a Miko shrine maiden for the Senensuke shrine. And we saw it a lot during the rituals in the Dark Shrine world when Hinako was being accepted into the family as part of the wedding ceremony. I also want to point out that yes, those rituals were painful, but that could also symbolize the pain and the struggle of conforming to traditions. It could be painful if you don't want to accept it. And maybe that is why the rituals were so gory, so graphic, with the arm being cut off, being branded on the back with the Tsuneki clan sign, her face being cut and replaced with a fox mask. You could definitely see the ideas of pain when having to deal with traditions and norms, mental pain, and the fact that you have to conform to it and that you have no free will to escape it. Although, to be fair, Hinako in the Dark Shrine world, her inner self, was more accepting of that role. We see the consequences of what happens to Shimizu Hinako when she goes against traditions and cultures. Now, Sakuko calls Hinako a traitor because Hinako has to leave her because she's being wedded. However, Rinko also calls Hinako a traitor, and that is a different context. The reason Rinko calls Hinako a traitor may be because of the fact that she is going against normal woman traditions for that time period. She's a traitor amongst women, which is a very interesting point to think about. We see that when Hinako goes against those normal ideals set for society on her, she is shunned away. She's judged by others because of how she acts. Rinko judges her so many times when we are interacting with Shu and she's around. Her parents yell at her saying why she's not behaving as a typical woman that is expected of her. The friends at the playground, they didn't accept Hinako to play with them because she would hang out with boys. Everybody judged her. The only person in that town that supported her decisions and accepted her for who she is was Shu. Shu saw Hinako as his partner, someone he could trust, a very close friend to be by. And of course, when Shu would have found out that Hinako had to get married, Shu would obviously feel a little bit of distraught, but still ensured to Hinako that it is her decision and her decision alone. It's again trying to fight between what you are expected to behave like in society compared to what you want to feel like and how it can affect others and other relationships. Growing up in those sorts of environments would absolutely be tough and have a very detrimental effect on your mental health. My personal experience, I also agree with that idea because I feel like I've experienced that before, having to grow up in an Asian environment, not being able to choose what I want, not having free will. Another thing in regards to womanhood and the themes that are prevalent in this game regarding Hinako in particular, Shimizu Hinako, is she fears to be a woman. And we actually see that in one of the monster designs. In the Shu dungeon, we fight this bloated, pregnant monster, pregnant bellies covering all over, spewing out monsters as it screams and wails. This monster could absolutely be a symbolism for the fact that Hinako has a fear of being married, having to have children, being pregnant. There is this one diary entry in the journal where Hinako saw Junko when she was pregnant and in the hospital. She describes Junko in that time in a very horrible, awful state, having aged so much, vomiting on occasion. We see those types of ideas in that monster design. It spews out acid as it attacks sometimes, maybe representing the fact that Junko would be seen vomiting a lot when Hinako saw Junko when she was pregnant. The pregnant bellies and how grotesque it looks symbolizes the fear of being pregnant, and the amount of them also may symbolize another thing, and that may be having kids, having to start your own family. Maybe Hinako isn't very well prepared to start a family, isn't very well prepared to have kids, and the amount of pregnant bellies on that monster may symbolize that. And just in general, the grotesque design of that monster just also highlights how much she has a fear of pregnancy and birth, especially the way it hurls and wails as we fight it. We actually also could say that we can see that with other monster designs like the mannequin dolls, both in the Fog world and in the Shrine world. They're abused, especially in the Fog world, and maybe Hinako has that fear of that if she is married to a man, will she face the same abuse that her mother is facing with Kanta? That fear is ever present, and it would haunt her and cause trauma to her. This game may also show not just the struggles of growing up as a woman in Japan at that time period, but as a young individual in general. I even think right now, with how the world is set, and from my personal experiences, growing up as a young adult is very tough these days. We have a lot of stress and pressure put on us to be the best and perfect person we can be, but that's not the easiest thing to do. It's very hard. Another thing I want to point out is one of the monsters that we see in the Dark Shrine world. It's one of the first monsters we see in the Dark Shrine world. It is a more masculine looking creature compared to the others. It is chained, it has no face, a hollow face, and a hollow chest. I've thought about this monster for quite some time, and I kind of feel like this monster represents the struggles that a male may have growing up. The pressure as well to get married to a perfect woman. The chains may be symbolizing that a male's fate is also set in stone, and that their fate is to also get married. Maybe men out there also have a fear that they don't want to be married, that they want to have their own life, and it's kind of mirrored in that creature design. Speaking of hollow faces, I can't believe I haven't mentioned this earlier, but look at the many hollow face designs of creatures in the game. There is a lot of references of there being no faces on people. Those monsters, and Shiromuku, by the way, who is Hinako, the person who is accepting woman traditions and being married off. We also see this in the very first teaser trailer for Silent Hill F way back when. Also, can I just say, I'm so sad they retconned the flower lady. I was actually looking so forward to seeing this lady in the game. But I will say, I believe that flower lady is what Shiromuku is. They both have a hollow face. In the end of the teaser trailer way back when, we see the flower lady smile and then her face comes off in that tryptophobic way. And we see that in Shiromuku too. I interpret the face being taken off a sign of no free will, no freedom of choice to do what you want to do, having to be forced to accept certain things such as being put into arranged marriages, forced marriages, behaving what is expected of you compared to what you yourself want to behave as. That hollowness is seen in these designs. The lack of choice and high levels of conformity, having to conform to societal norms. It's kind of like a situation too, and especially in the Flower Lady teaser, where you may have a fake smile when meeting people, but behind that face is hollowness, despair, depression, and the fact that you can't do what you want to do. And in this case, being forced to be wedded and married away. being forced to be someone you don't want to be. Another theme I really feel like that is prominent in the story is the themes of marriage, which is very obvious. We see that during the ceremonies where we bid farewell to our friends. That's what usually happens in weddings, especially in Asian weddings I've seen from experience, where at the end of the ceremony, we have to say goodbye to family members, close people, loved ones. And that's kind of reminiscent here when we say goodbye to our friends, but in a more horrific way by sort of killing them. We then see with the rituals, as I mentioned earlier, how the stages work. Our fox arm being given to us, a sign that we are giving our hand, our arm in marriage. The branding on the back of Hinako's body representing her entry into the Tsuneki clan, and then her fox mask being put on her, showing that she has devotion, unrequited love and devotion towards Kotoyuki. Now, there's one thing you guys may be surprised a lot about that I haven't talked about, and it's the flowers. The flower imagery in this game. Now, flowers are something you'd associate with weddings a lot too. Roses, obviously, and many other flowers associated in that field. But in this game, the most prominent flower is the Higambana, aka the red spider lily. Now, red spider lilies obviously represent death. Now, that is very much aligned with some of the themes in this game, because if you think about it, and again regarding the idea of marriage and having to have no free will, having to accept and being forced into arranged marriages and situations like that, again the idea of the hollow face that we see a lot of in the game, you could say in itself that's a sort of death scenario, having to leave your inner self, your childhood self, to pursue womanly ideas and ideals. We see that with the idea we have with Shimizu Hinako, her childhood self, and then with Hinako in the Dark Shrine world, the inner self that is accepting societal norms. That is why we see those red spider lilies a lot when we are escaping from the fog monster at the start of the game. That is Shiromuku, who has killed her old self, accepting a new life, being reborn into a new life. A life different from her past, her childhood past. Another thing I want to mention is the themes of friendship. Friendship themes are mentioned a lot in this game, and it's obviously in regards to how Hinako had a relationship with all of her friends, Shu, Rinko, and Sakuko. This game, I feel like, teaches that friendships, sadly, cannot last forever. It's a scary thought that we all really pretty much have, but sadly, things cannot stay forever. Friendships have to end, and that's something that is seen a lot of the time. I feel like in real life, I've heard so many people who used to say that they were friends with one person and then they had to leave them because either they moved or an argument happened which ended a relationship. These things happen, and it is a reminder of that fact that no matter how friendly we are to each other, sometimes those bonds have to end, either because of bad ways or just because of how life is to us in general. Friends are, of course, very important to us. They keep us motivated, they keep us happy, they keep us enjoying life. For Hinako, it was Shu, that bright light, someone that she could play Space Wars with together. And the same would be seen with Shu in regards to Hinako. Friends provide that comfort, that warmth, that venting. Hinako always would have vented to Shu about the situations that she was dealing with, and that's what friends are for, keeping each other company. But sadly, I feel like this game just reminds us that stuff like that cannot last forever. Sometimes we have to go our separate ways. It just depends on when that takes place. We also see the dark sides of friendships when we look at Rinko and Sakuko, how Sakuko hated Hinako so much because she subconsciously thought that she would speak bad things about her behind her back. And then with Rinko, how jealousy turns someone into a bad person. How you get feelings of jealousy and then they transform into feelings of hatred to another person. Feelings of hatred, I guess, is something that is not uncommon to Silent Hill. I feel like Silent Hill 2 delves into that idea a lot, that anger and hatred is maybe a very human response to certain situations. I mean, Hinako would have felt the same way. She hated her parents. She hated being told what to do. She was rebellious when she had no freedom of choice. Very interesting that her inner self also shows and harbors those feelings, and that's why we see Shiramuku kill Hinako's parents, why we see Hinako kill her friends in the Dark Shrine World when bidding farewell. Lastly, I want to talk about one thing that I feel like is very vaguely mentioned in this game, but not spoken about a lot, and I think that's to do with mental health. Take an example of Sakuko and one specific diary entry we read about her, where she was in a field trip and she obviously may have freaked out because she was in a situation where she was in the dark. Her parents told her off because of her phobia of the dark and that it caused problems. Her mum in particular scolding Sakuko, warning her for how she behaved. I mention this because I feel like it draws upon a thing that I've thought about for a very long time and is very important to mention, especially because we're set in 60s Japan, and that's the concept of mental health problems. I don't think mental health was very much understood in that time period, especially in that part of the world. So we see the mental struggles that people have when growing up, when you live in an environment and a society where mental health is not seen as an issue. Because I would say, you shouldn't be scolding someone because they have that phobia. Instead, you should be comforting them, helping them, trying to get them out of those situations. Now, I feel like Shu did that to Hinako. Shu was able to provide comfort and support to Hinako when she was under stress, with the pills, for example. And of course, I really don't think anyone in Hinako's family, especially her parents, understood what mental stress and anguish she would be going through when having to deal with an abusive environment, an environment where she was being told what to do and how to act, when that's not what she wanted at all. She wanted her own life, she wanted her own freedoms, and that was not really given to her. So I guess it's more of an educative note that mental health issues should not be something that should be ignored. These stuff are serious and they can lead to problems. I mean, look at Sakuko's interaction and feelings towards Hinako. Because she was not mentally well, she may have developed those feelings of negativity that she had and harbored towards Hinako after finding out that Hinako would leave her. Those feelings of hatred that she thinks that Hinako says bad things behind her back when that wasn't really true. She just didn't understand. She was vulnerable. I kind of feel like Rinko may have been in that situation too, because of the situation she was in where she thought that Shu and Hinako were so close to each other that it could have been seen as a relationship, that she too had unnecessary bad inner demons coming towards her. Again, look at the boss fight with Rinko. We see puppets of Rinko maybe feeding that jealousy in her mind. Maybe she had someone to talk to. Maybe if she had help, she could relieve those pains, relieve those bad thoughts, those jealous thoughts, those hatred thoughts, and maybe everything would have been just fine. I don't know, it's just a little thought of a theme that may have been slightly inserted into this game to kind of think about. Again, when it comes to themes in Silent Hill games, it's always all over the place. Everyone can have their own interpretation. And honestly, that's why I love the Silent Hill franchise. You can say a lot about the stuff that happens in these games, and you could either be wrong or true, but at the end of the day, it is your opinion. And the creativity in ideas and symbolism and what things mean is what makes this game franchise so cool and fun to explore. And which is ultimately one of the reasons why I love this franchise. Oh my god, I've been speaking so much, but we're nearly there, guys. We're nearly there. I just want to talk about another thing, and that is the links and references that I think Silent Hill F has with the other Silent Hill games. The Silent Hill games set in Silent Hill, Maine, USA. So one of the first things that caught my attention as soon as I started the game is reading the journal on the setting of where the game takes place, of course, in Ebisugaoka. In the journal, we find out that Ebisugaoka was once a very busy town because a lot of people would come in it due to the dam construction and the coal mines. Big emphasis on coal mines. Because yes, in Maine Silent Hill, that town was also a coal mining town. A lot of people would come to the Silent Hill in America because of the coal mines. It was a coal mining industry over there. So straight away, we see a striking similarity between the coal mine infrastructure in Ebisugaoka and in Silent Hill. And in both instances, both of those coal mines had to close down for reasons of their own. Again, it also mentions the idea that in both situations and in both towns, a lot of people would come in for their own reasons. For Silent Hill in America, it would be because of the tourist stuff. The Toluca Lake, a lot of people would come in for tourism. Same with the coal mines and the job opportunities there. In Ebisugaoka, we also see this form of migration occur in the town. There's one note that reads that a lot of people from the Taira clan who were defeated would come to the town after losing the Genpei War. So a bit of Ebisugaoka lore and history written in some of those notes. But again, people would come in because of the dam construction, because of the coal mines, and once all that stopped, it became, quote, a sad little town. Not a lot of things happening. Although it is important to note that in the American Silent Hill, people would come in due to tourism, but the actual residents there wouldn't typically leave. They would still be persistent because of the activities of the cult. Remember, in American Silent Hill, the cult activities were very prevalent, and the cult society known as the Order were very much in charge of things going on in Silent Hill. Speaking of cults, I really want to talk about the idea that possibly there is a cult at play in Ebisugaoka as well, and maybe not entirely Ebisugaoka, but in the surrounding areas. Because you see, when we're in the Dark Shrine World, which is also the place where the Tsunekis reside, although it is a twisted world when Hinako is in it, but in general, it is home to the Tsuneki clan. It is its own shrine. There are special rooms that you can access in New Game Plus. One specific room where you can see a hand in a cabinet, which implies the tradition again of what the Tsunekis do with marrying young, poor women from poorer households. But that room in particular, which shows all the, the tools used for the rituals, there are other parts of the shrine which do this, where near the end of the game, where we are going through certain rooms in the shrines, we see a room with a lot of lanterns, we see a room with a lot of scrolls, we see a room with a lot of taiko drums, and there's one particular instance in that area where there's a puzzle where if you take the wrong door, you enter a room which looks a lot like a prison room. Chains everywhere, prisons around. We see the chained, masculine, dark shrine monsters in that area too. So it makes you really wonder, what is the Tsuneki's true goal with their activities? What is this long line of history of marrying young, poor women to rich, wealthy heirs do? What is their dark, true meaning? And if a cult is at play here, then it may be another link and reference to the American Silent Hill because of the cult there too. Of course, this is all speculation. It might not be true, but I really want to... It is a room for thought. Speaking of cults and religions, let's talk about the gods in both towns, because yes, both of the towns share another link in the fact that they both worship some sort of deity. Although in the American Silent Hill, again, it is mostly the cult, but you could argue that's the whole of town because most of the majority of the town in Silent Hill, especially those who were born up and raised there believed in the activities of the cult, of the order worshipping God. Now, in Ebisugaoka, we've already mentioned this, but most of the townspeople worship Inari-sama, especially in the events of the time of the game that is set. Inari-sama, again, is a goddess, a fox goddess deity that the people of the town worship. We see a lot of this imagery in the Dark Shrine world, and we see a lot of also little mini shrines around Ebisugaoka. So again, there's a link there between the American Silent Hill and in Ebisugaoka. Now, Ebisugaoka is very interesting because Inari-sama was not the only goddess that was worshipped. There was once a god before that, or a faith before that, that was different from the Inari faith, and that is to do with the divine tree. Again, the divine tree was worshipped before Inari-sama, and for example, it was worshipped by people who would go to the Senensugi shrine a lot, which is Sakuko's domain. So there's this tree that was once worshipped by the people of Ebisugaoka, known as the 1,000-year cedar tree. It was a divine tree that was worshipped by all in the town, until one day lightning striked it, and it was heavily damaged. From that day onwards, they saw it as a sign of a bad omen, and so once they lost their faith with the cedar trees due to its damage, they then worshipped the next best thing, and Sakuga mentions this. It was the moss-covered Inari statue, the fox statue, and from then on, people in the town would worship the Inari statue and Inari-sama. Now, the reason I mention this is because before I mentioned that Sakuko would have dreams about a deity speaking to them, being angry that their followers were taken from them. And this is most likely to do with the cedar tree faith that was taken away. And I think that's what happens on ending number 2 for Silent Hill F when we fight the Tsukumogami, this entity that invades Shu. Now, to start ending number 2, to make some context here, Shimizu Hinako and Hihako, the two selves, meet up and fight each other. However, something occurs and Shimizu Hinako is seen to be possessed by a spirit. Fox Mask asks Hinako, Fox Hinako, to drink the Crimson Water. We will talk about the Crimson Water because that is another link to Silent Hill, but that's for that time. However, Fox Lady Hinako drinks the Crimson Water and it relieves the possessive spirit from the body. But I believe this possessive spirit then invades Shu when Shu is in the shrine. And it is none other than this creature known as the Tsukumogami. Now then, this Tsukumogami comes from the name of the Tsukumogami faith. That is the name of the faith that was worshipped by many of the townsfolk before Inari-sama. It is the faith related to the divine tree that was worshipped by all in the town. So you could say this evil spirit of the tree came back to haunt the wedding ceremony in this case, taking its revenge against Inari-sama, because again, we have a lot of fox imagery. The Tsunekis are seen to be very heavily worshipping the Inari faith. And so that would be the prime opportunity for this other deity to take revenge over the fact that Inari-sama has taken over its followers, and it invades Shu, and then we kill it. The reason as well that I associate this with the divine tree is because of its description. It's described as being very tall, with a lot of weapons. Tools which are related to the faith of what Inari-sama does regarding tools, and what the Tsukumogami faith relates to in terms of tools as well. So a bit of comparisons and parallels there. And the fact that it's described as having tree branches on its design, relating to the tree, of course. So a bit of history there, and a bit of interesting information regarding the gods of Ebisugaoka. So unlike Silent Hill, where it's just one singular god, which is worshipped by the cults in general, in Ebisugaoka, it's more so that there's been a shift in faith between the town as it grows older. And it's not more so a cult, but mainly more of a religion amongst the townsfolk. And now my final link to how Silent Hill F Ebisugaoka is similar to the Silent Hill in Maine, and I would say this is the biggest link to the series, despite the fact that yes, this is its own standalone spin-off, but you can't help but realize these connections. I'm going to talk about White Claudia. Now, White Claudia is first mentioned in the very first Silent Hill game. It is a flower that grows among lakes, aka Toluca Lake in Silent Hill. Now, this flower was used by the Order, the cult in Silent Hill, to make a certain type of drug known as PTV. This PTV was distributed to a lot of tourists when people were coming into the town by the drug cartels. Yes, Silent Hill in America has a history of drug cartels. I know, pretty crazy. But the reason those drugs were used is to possibly try to get more people to enter the Order, the cult, to worship God. It is also believed that this drug would help connect to the spiritual realm, further highlighting their connection with the god of the cult. Now, the reason I'm mentioning this random flower from Silent Hill 1 is because we may have found this same plant possibly in Silent Hill F. Now, look at this lake. This lake is near Shu's house. It is very foggy around it, and there are white flowers growing near the lake, on the lake, just like the characteristics of White Claudia in the American Silent Hill. It is believed that this flower too is White Claudia. And yes, it may be hard to see how White Claudia looks like in the American Silent Hill because it's in a document in the first game. You can't help but think the characteristics are still there. Of course, it's most likely going to be white since it has white in the name, and in Silent Hill F, where it's near Shu's house in the lake, it is growing near the lake, just like White Claudia in Toluca Lake. Now, in Silent Hill F, this plant actually has a different name. It is called Hakokusu, and we can actually find notes of this plant in a certain research note near Shu's house. Now, this plant is seen to have been cultivated by the Iwai family for a very long time, so a lot of research would have been put into this plant. It is seen as a very prized plant, even being termed the title of the flower of the gods. And it is said that this plant can be used to, quote, converse with the gods, or even enter the spiritual realm, which are very similar characteristics to White Claudia, which is why the Order and the cult in the American Silent Hill used that plant a lot. Now, an interesting thing about this plant as well is that Shu and the Iwais most likely found out that cultivating the seeds of this plant can reduce something known as Kakura Makakura. Now, Kakura Makakura was seen as a very special medicinal drug that was introduced into the town of Ebisugaoka by a foreign missionary some time ago in the town's history. It is said that Kakura Makakura is used to talk with one's inner self, which is very coincidental since we see that in this game with Hinako and Shimizu Hinako. So it's safe to say that the drugs that were given to Hinako were made of Kakura Makakura, studied by Shu and produced by him to be given to Hinako to deal with the stress that she would have in her day-to-day life and the pressures she was facing. Now, we know that didn't quite turn out well, since in ending 1, she goes in a psychotic breakdown and does a massacre at the wedding. However, Shu surely would have known the consequences, and he actually does admit it in the second ending when Shu and Hinako confront each other at the end. He wanted to give those drugs to Hinako because Shu did not want Hinako to get married. He admits it in the end of ending 2. And now the reason I mentioned Kakura Makakura is if this seed was used to make the drug, and it was derived from Hakokusu, then this must be very parallel to how in Silent Hill, Maine, White Claudia was the perennial herb used to make the drug PTV which was then distributed in the town to tourists to attract more attention to the cult. The parallels are so similar and very on point. Now again, this is just speculation, but I really feel like I want to hone this theory even more when we talk about another thing that we can obtain during New Game Plus playthroughs, and that is something known as Agura no Hote Sama. Now, this divine elixir is something that you can obtain in the Dark Shrine world during the time when you would go through the rituals. Now in New Game Plus, you actually don't do those rituals again. You don't get the fox arm again. You actually get that beforehand. But you can still enter the region. And the reason we can do that is because you can enter and access a secret area that cannot be obtained in your first playthrough. Now, when you enter this area, it's outside of the building. It is in a traditional Japanese-styled lake environment, which is very cool, by the way. And at the top of the room, there is an office-like space, and again, you can see the white plant, Hakokusu, present. Along with that, you can then obtain a certain item known as Agura no Hote Sama. Now, when we pick it up, it is basically described in the item description as a red liquid. There is also a note that we can pick up which describes the Agura no Hote Sama in a bit more detail. It is seen as a crimson water that is blessed with the power to purify evil spirits. Purify evil spirits, huh? Red liquid. Well, if you're a Silent Hill fan and you know the other Silent Hill games, then you may know another item that is similar to this. Agloophatus. So, for those of you who don't know, Agloophatus is something that is seen in the American Silent Hill a lot, especially in Silent Hill 1 and 3. Agloophatus is a red liquid which is used to do the exact same thing as what Agura no Hote Sama does. Eradicate evil spirits. Now, we see this in Silent Hill 1, where in the good ending for the game, Kaufman at the end throws the red liquid towards the newly birthed or newly created Alessa, birthing a demon god, sort of. And in Silent Hill 3, of course, Heather has the red jewel which was given to her by Harry. This red jewel is in fact a solidified version of Agloophatus, and when Heather takes it, she pukes out the unborn fetus of God. Yeah, you're gonna have to watch Silent Hill 3 to understand what the hell happens in that game. But we see this happen in Silent Hill F2 with the Crimson Water Agura no Hote Sama, because in ending number 2, a certain evil spirit has seemed to possess Shimizu Hinako at the end. Foxmask directs Hinako to drink the Agura no Hote Sama to ward off the evil spirit so that Foxman can deal with it in the end. Very interesting parallels here, because both of those items, Agloophatus and the Crimson Water in Silent Hill F, seem to do the same properties and effects. Now, I want to direct our attention back to the room where we find the Crimson Water. On that table, where we also find the Hakokusu by its side. I'm pretty sure then that may mean that Agura no Hote Sama is also produced using the white Hakokusu, Silent Hill F's version of White Claudia. Especially when you read the journal on Agura no Hote Sama, it also mentions that it takes a lot of time and effort to create this crimson water. Very similar to how long it takes to cultivate and grow Hakokusu in the certain environments that it works in. Now, Agura no Hote Sama is also seen to be a very ancient elixir, very traditionally used in the town of Ebisugaoka. So clearly it has a long history of it being used in the town for certain stuff, specifically given to people in the town who suffered from certain pains or certain illnesses or diseases. it kind of had the moniker that it could remove evil spirits because in the early days of Ebisugaoka's history, a lot of the town people thought that getting certain pains or illnesses was the result of demonic possession. So that's kind of how it got its famous title of being used to dispel evil spirits. Now let's try and compare this to Aglophithus because there are some very interesting similarities between both when we compare them. Now Aglophithus is produced by the herb of the same name according to a journal that we find in Silent Hill 3. And of course it has the power to dispel evil spirits. It also mentions that Aglophithus is very rare and extremely difficult to obtain, and that is also mentioned when talking about Agura no Hote-sama in Silent Hill F2, that it is hard to obtain and make, and it takes a lot of time to produce it. So we see a lot of similarity there too. Now a little tidbit note, when you go by the flowers in the lake near Shu's house, you can actually hear this interesting sound when you get close to the lake. Pretty cool, huh? I've deduced that this noise is kind of like portraying maybe some sort of divine effect. It definitely has a divine sound, if that makes any sense. It's definitely weird too, but it definitely shows that this flower is very special and that it has some very special, magical, divine properties almost. Just like White Claudia, really. With this plant and herbology and medicinal similarities between Silent Hill F and the other Silent Hill entries, it's hard not to notice that maybe despite Silent Hill F being its own spin-off and its own independent part of the series, that surely there may be a connection between Silent Hill F and the other games. I personally feel like in my own headcanon that they're actually in the same universe, but of course not explicitly related in specific ways, but rather have some certain similarities. Again, the idea that the foreign missionary brought Kakura Makakura into the town is something very interesting, and maybe it could be possible that this knowledge of this drug was then migrated to the Americas and used in Silent Hill, Maine. It may also be possible that White Claudia and Hakokusu are the same, or that they're maybe just very closely related species in this plant classification system, which is why we see the effects of both plants being very similar in their respective games that they are found in. Same with the Aglophithus and Agura no Hote-sama links. Maybe they are exactly the same, or that they are very closely related through classification. It really is a lot to think about. I mean, who knows, maybe the F in Silent Hill F stands for flower. Clearly there's been a lot of flower imagery in this game. I mean, it's obviously very apparent in Silent Hill F, but especially when looking at the notes and looking at how the drugs are made from their respective plant, it is very interesting to think about, and honestly that's why I like Silent Hill in general. After playing a Silent Hill game, it really makes and sticks with you for a very long time, especially with how the story is portrayed. It definitely kept me going crazy with theories for a very long time after I finished playing it, especially after that first ending that we got. And honestly, that's why I find it really interesting and fun to play through. So yeah, all in all, those are my links that I have noticed between Silent Hill and Silent Hill F. I will say the plant links was probably the biggest reference and connection that I have seen, especially online too, with the community on relating Silent Hill F to the other mainline entries. With that out of the way now, I think it's time that we end this video and I can give my final thoughts on Silent Hill F. I know a lot of people, and especially I would assume a lot of Silent Hill fanatics, would be very controversial on this entry. Again, the fact that it's absolutely not set in Silent Hill and that it's set in Ebisugaoka, Japan, 60s time period, would definitely, I guess, deter people. I mean, people would probably assume that, oh, it just has the Silent Hill name slapped onto it. It has nothing to do with what happens in Silent Hill. However, I have a different opinion on that. I think it is very much a standout game. I think the story is very interesting. What makes Silent Hill is its psychological horror, its themes that it talks about. Every Silent Hill game has its own themes that makes the player think, that makes the player reflect on, because these themes relate to real life. And Silent Hill F is in no way no exception. The topics it mentions are so damn real. Having to live up in an environment where traditions and Asian cultures are very important and that you should display them more often. It's a story that shows how free will is very important and that people should be given the freedom to choose how they live their lives. It also highlights the horror of having to try and be different, which is something that can be very depressing because at the end of the day, everyone should be able to live the life they want. It's their life after all. We see the struggle Hinako has trying to adapt to wanting to live their own life, or having to adapt to be forced to go a certain path they don't wish to. It's very unsettling and it's just fantastic. The way they portray it is amazing, and mixed with the horror, it is a very, very good masterclass in horror in my opinion. I think Silent Hill F will definitely be one of those games in the series and the franchise that will be talked about for a very, very long time. And I think it does a lot of good in educating people, because again, this is set in a very past time period in Japan, which is a different world compared to the Western world, and it definitely highlights some of the struggles that people would have had in that time period to grow up. The themes of society and psychological pressures and conformity are very much seen in this as well, and it's really, really a good, interesting case study when talking about it, and if you're interested about topics like that in general too. I feel like it also educates us on how Japanese society is like, and understanding its folklore, learning more about the kitsune in that game. Of course, the kitsune folklore is very prevalent even in real life Japan. We also learn about how Japanese marriages are like, and learning a bit more about the Shinto faith, because I feel like that's also something very present in Silent Hill F. I really, really enjoyed playing this game, and it was a lot of fun too. Yes, the combat is a bit I did find it, but overall the story was amazing. And honestly, even if you're someone who hasn't played a Silent Hill game before, I would actually definitely recommend for those who are in that boat to try out Silent Hill F, because I feel like it's a very good starting point to understanding how Silent Hill games portrays psychological horror. Again, it is the masterclass in portraying psychological horror in its game. That is what it's known for. So it does a very good job in showing that type of horror, and Silent Hill F is no exception in that. So yeah, definitely a really, really outstanding game with a lot of stuff to discuss and talk about. Ooh, that was a lot to talk about. This game just has so much stuff to dissect, and I'm pretty sure I am still missing a lot of things that I could have mentioned in this video. From talking more about Junko, since she's still a bit of a mystery too in this video game, to, talking about the stuff revealed in the fourth ending pathway, where we learn a little bit more about the mother and father, or the fact that after you get out of the Lost in the Fog scenario, you can actually then see two shoes in the area when you come out. Yes, two shoes, a pair of shoes, one might say. Or how in one of the cutscenes of this damn game, they decided to use the fucking vine boom. So yeah, a lot in this game. But after all this, I really hope you guys enjoyed this video. Again, this is something I've never done before, and this is probably my biggest video on this channel. It would mean a lot if you could like and subscribe, and if you have any thoughts too, whether you are very new to the Silent Hill franchise and Silent Hill F, or you're someone who has played the game and, you know, just wanted a bit of analysis on the game. I really appreciate anyone who has come to the end of this video. It is highly appreciated. Again, I love talking about video games a lot, and I kind of want to one day get into a scenario where I can talk more, do a little bit of these more like video essay scenarios and stuff like that, because I'm very much a yapper, I feel sometimes. I don't know, maybe. Again, thank you guys for being here. Make sure to follow me on my socials, and again, don't forget to follow me on Twitch. We are currently doing a Silent Hill marathon. In fact, as I'm speaking right now, I am most likely on Silent Hill 4 at the moment. So again, it would mean a lot if you could follow me there. We're trying to reach 100 followers on Twitch. But I think that's enough of me yapping and talking. I hope you guys have a great rest of your day, and I really hope you enjoyed this video. Until next time.